Arc 10, Chapter 26. A word of congratulations. From the very outset of when he had been appointed as Phylor's knight, Heinkel had felt a sense of impending crisis stemming from her head-first personality, but that cognition of his had been incorrect. Phylor's recklessness had been far worse than Heinkel had ever imagined. Phylor, so you're saying that even though the medicine is in the warehouse, it can't be delivered? Stranger. Yes. The traffic of dragon carriages in and out of royal capital is far too congested, so the church's carts have all come to a standstill. At this rate, Phylor, the medicine will go bad, and there are many elders at the treatment centers who will be in danger if they don't take their medicine every day. If this is what it comes to, then we'll just have to do our best to transport it with our own hands. How about it? Stranger. With our own hands. Phylor, that's right. If the dragon carriages can't be moved, we'll just have to carry out the cargo with human strength. Don't you think this could work? At the entrance to the chapel of the Church of the Divine Dragon, a young man with a catalogue of medicines in hand leaned a great deal backwards when met with Phylor's vigor, the latter leaning towards him with her fists balled up. Perhaps taking the young man's reaction as an affirmation, Phylor seemed ready to rush over to the commercial district at any moment, and so Heinkel hastened to keep her in check with a hold on. Heinkel, Miss Phylor, if you take that approach, then the problem won't be resolved even when the sun sets, and then rises again tomorrow. Don't tell me you were seriously about to try carrying everything by yourself. Phylor, what are you talking about? Isn't it obvious? Heinkel-sama is my knight, so we're in the same boat I tell you. I'm not going by myself, but with the two of us. Heinkel, like hell that's going to happen. Even if, say, for the sake of argument, we were to depend on manual labor, Miss Phylor, there's no way I could let someone of your standing go. If anyone's going, it'd be me on my own. Phylor, please don't say such standoffish things. Believe it or not, I'm also quite strong myself. At the convent, I even used to help rearrange rooms all the time for the old ladies with poor backs. Heinkel, that's not what I'm talking about. Phylor got carried away at full throttle, and her ruby eyes widened at Heinkel's angry shout. While she blinked her sparkling, gemstone-like eyes, Heinkel scratched at his own red hair, directing a displeased oi to the young worker from the transport company. Heinkel, what's needed is a way to transport the medicine to the treatment center in the Eastern Ward, yeah. There ought to also be treatment centers in the West and South, so what about those ones? Worker, the Western and Southern ones. There are still viable routes to be taken there, so there is no risk of the medicine getting stuck along the way. Heinkel, then this will be a quick chat. Instead of the medicine, you should relocate the patients instead. As he spoke, Heinkel snatched the medicine catalog out from the hands of the young employee. All the medicines listed there were ones he was familiar with, and he could also roughly imagine the conditions of the patients who were in need of them. Ever since his wife had fallen asleep, he had inquired into the remedies for every illness he could discover. Having made use of his privileged family status residing in the royal capital, Heinkel had a greater knowledge of medicine than the average healer. Heinkel, although it's not like I've seen the patients for myself. Ultimately, the decision rests with the healers, but it's more realistic than trying to figure out a way to get all the dragon carriages through. And if a route to the Eastern Ward can be secured while going through with the makeshift solution, everything should go smoothly from then on. Well, how's that for now, Miss Phylor? Phylor, yes. But what about the people who can't be moved from the treatment center? Heinkel, it's not like everyone in the treatment center is a severe case. Thus, as long as we pack a single crate with the most urgent medicines, it'll last for the time being. Phylor, I see. And as for that crate, I shall Heinkel. Phylor, not do it, rather, I entrust it to you. After all, carrying things is your job. Pierced by Heinkel's eyes, Phylor was discouraged, before turning a smile in the direction of the young worker. After he had gotten the catalog back from Heinkel, he nodded at Phylor's words, worker, understood, I will act accordingly. As for the treatment centers, Phylor, please rest assured. The treatment centers and the Church of the Divine Dragon are deeply involved with each other. We will promptly send an envoy and act to ensure there are no misunderstandings. You may focus on your own duty. Worker. Yes. Both of you, thank you very much. Following an expression of relief, The young man bowed his head along with a sense of duty and left the chapel. After seeing him off, Heinkel slumped his shoulders in exhaustion. From the very beginning to the end, Philor had continued to give counsel without losing steam. So while it was fine for her to receive gratitude, it was a bit uncomfortable when the same was shown to Heinkel, who did nothing but remain by her side. After all, he was a man who, truth be told, did not have any right to be standing here. Philor, hard work as always, Heinkel-sama. That was a discussion in which our brilliant coordination really got to shine, wasn't it? Since we also sent out an envoy, he should be able to attend to his own duties with peace of mind. And having no clue as to those inner feelings of Heinkel, Philor returned after sending one of the church's adherents to go off as an envoy, before lightly holding her hand up to him. She did not bring it down. Even after staring at it for a while, she still did not bring it down, waving it left and right in front of Heinkel. Heinkel, what? Philor, not what. It's a ritual to extol our joint efforts. If I hoist my hand up like this, Heinkel-sama, then you also bring your hand up to meet it. By doing that, we get to share in the feeling of having guided each other well. It's a custom in the Church of the Divine Dragon. Heinkel, back when I used to go to church, I never saw anything like that. Philor, it might have been a recently added custom, and it might have been slightly influenced by me. Considering the culture of the church that had unchangingly worshipped the divine dragon for 400 years, rather than new rituals coming in and out of fashion, the notion of Philor having had a large influence was more convincing. Unfortunately, it did not seem like Philor would be satisfied until he completed the custom, so after another sigh, Heinkel clapped his own palm to her hand. Heinkel, Miss Philor, about what you said earlier, Philor. Ah, that was some splendid tact. Rest assured. I also made sure to tell the envoy to inform the people at the treatment center that it was your idea, Heinkel-sama. Heinkel, you need to have more self-restraint, and frankly, more self-respect too. Philor, self-restraint? I don't like those words. As if betrayed by her cheerful smile, Philor turned pale as she staggered towards a bench within the chapel. While watching over her state, he let a deep exhale out of his nose. He wished to avoid doubling the things he wanted to say in such a short period of time. Heinkel, to start things off, you need to stop plunging in headfirst and taking actions akin to searching around in the ashes of a fireplace. You don't know what's going to be amidst the ashes, and in the majority of cases, you're going to get burned. When you've got no other choice but to search through the ashes, make use of other people. Starting with me. Philor, that's because you're an immortal knight who can't lose out to flames, Heinkel-sama. Heinkel, wrong. It's because if anyone's going to get hurt, it should be the people who don't care about getting hurt. Deliberately stating those strict words clearly, he attempted to rectify Philor's thinking. Philor's way of doing things was perilous. But the ability to display a disposition that captivated people's attention was an indispensable quality for a politician. Given that she had gotten a delayed participation in the royal selection, she would need to, without metaphor, avoid the situations that were likely to burn her and effectively play the cards in her hand. That was why. Heinkel, don't go bringing up my name each and every time. I'll be blunt, but seriously, it will only get in the way of your campaign in the royal selection, Miss Philor. Philor, no way, Heinkel. But because they heard it was my suggestion, the earlier matter with the treatment center might not go over so well. The fact that it wouldn't be strange for such a thing to happen is the epitome of my current standing. Sorry, but I'm aware of it. Philor, hic. His answer appeared to frustrate Philor, but since it was none other than himself who had caused her to make that face, Heinkel did not possess the words to comfort or encourage her. To be perfectly honest, he was still regretting his decision. As expected, Heinkel should not have accepted the request of Philor, which could only be seen as delusional, whenever he witnessed the attitude of his master, a girl who, while still clumsy, was earnestly taking part in the royal selection. More and more did he end up despising his own self, who served as naught but a hindrance to her ambitions. Doubly so if when considering that all the infamy he had accrued until now had been earned through his own volition. Heinkel, in the end, nothing I do ever goes well. Even though on occasion, he would take action while aiming for the best path forward. After a bit of time, his past actions would creep up and wring him by the neck. Again and again, it was akin to as if Heinkel was running a few laps behind in his life, coming up on unavoidable traps that he had left behind. Tripping over the holes dug by his past self, he had lost count of how many times he had fallen over until now. That was precisely why, whenever he was able to accomplish some sort of feat, it would be the best outcome for Philor if the impurity known as Heinkel was not mixed in. Philor. Enough, it's not like me. And narrowing her two eyes, Philor suddenly shouted before Heinkel as he was deep in thought, and he noticed that she had been firmly pinching the back of her own white hand. Then, as she cried out, "Oh, Heinkel widened his eyes. "Heinkel, what are you doing?" "Philor, I'm admonishing my own fecklessness. In truth, I would have liked to slap even just one of my cheeks, but if I did so, I would need to go and meet people with a completely red face, right? So, since a long time ago, whenever I want to scold myself, I do this. If it's just my hand that turns red, I can just make the excuse that I got so angry that I slammed the table." "Heinkel, is that really a good excuse? I mean, it'd be clear that you got angry, but..." "Philor, it's fine. After all, it's the truth that I got angry. And also, regardless of what anyone tells me, this alone is something I won't yield on. Going forward as well, I won't hide Heinkel-sama's contributions." As she firmly thrust her finger out at his face, Heinkel reflexively reeled backward. To close the distance which he had opened, Philor took a step forward. Heinkel stepped back. She stepped forward, stepped back, stepped forward. Driving him up against the wall, she thrust her finger right against his forehead. Then, as Philor pressed Heinkel against the wall, "Philor, as for why everyone says all these bad things about you, Heinkel-sama, let's say it's because your behavior up until this point gives them a reason to do so. I find even that to be extremely frustrating, but I'll swallow it for now. Even so, I can't accept the notion that your actions from the past will dull the value of your actions today and tomorrow. Heinkel, Miss Philor. Philor, if there are lives that can be saved by your words, then if they didn't have your words, their lives might not have been saved. If I'm going to be the monarch, and you're going to be my one and only knight, then there are going to be many opportunities for you to be present at such scenes. Hence, in preparation for when such times inevitably come, Heinkel-sama, we must work to restore your honor at once." Heinkel. "Philor, and so, Heinkel-sama, I'll listen to your advice as best I can, but I'll never follow any comments that say I should just look down upon you, or that I should just hide you in a box, that I should just hurry up and throw away such an alcoholic of a knight. I hereby declare this." Slowly lowering her finger, Philor brought it down to feel the uniform adorning Heinkel, his uniform as an official knight of the church, which he had been forced to wear given his position as knight to a saintess of the Church of the Divine Dragon. With a base of blue, it was a sacred and sublime article, with the same amount, or an even greater number of layers in comparison to the uniforms of the royal guard, filling him with awe. It was an outfit he was fully aware did not suit him in the slightest. However, Philor, but eventually, it will be so that when anyone so much as lays eyes upon these clothes, Heinkel-sama will be the first thing that comes to mind. When that time comes, it'll be fine for you to make full use of the church's influence and put on airs as much as you like. Shutting a single eye, Philor made a clumsy display of amiability. Hearkening her words, Heinkel heaved a long sigh. That all-out head-first attitude of hers was something she applied to just about everyone. Of course, Heinkel was no exception. Heinkel, if Miss Philor becomes the monarch, so, does that mean whenever you help others at the church, it's just a calculated act? Philor, could you please not say such outrageous things? You see, this is all an extremely good deal. By giving counsel to the people who come to the church, they get help with their troubles, and I also build a reputation for doing good things, and it also feels nice for us when we do a good thing, right? Heinkel, don't lump me in there as if it's only natural. I'm Philor. But don't you think it's joyous to receive gratitude from others? That's how it is for me. That's why, even if the title of saintess is heavy to shoulder, I quite like the church." Puffing her chest out with a nod, Philor's words rendered Heinkel unable to respond. Whether it was because Philor had already said what she had wanted to say, or out of consideration for Heinkel, she did not press him for an answer. Then, the chance for him to voice any answer, was postponed by the sound of the doors to the chapel opening once more. "Stranger, do you have a moment? There are some civilians getting into a fight right outside the church." Philor, oh dear, will rush there straight away. Heinkel sama us too. Heinkel, don't run. I can't let you trip and fall, thereby increasing the number of people who'll need the medicine that's already short on supply. Philor, then, with fast walking. As she spoke, she took 3 large strides towards the person who had called out to them, and from there, as if forgetting about the reason for her fast walking, Philor broke out into a sprint, causing Heinkel to scratch his head. Then, clicking his tongue, he hurried to chase after the back of his reckless master. The scene changes. "Stranger, you're a harder worker than I thought you'd be, you know?" At the time of day when orange beams of the setting sun flowed in through the large clerestory, a voice called out from behind Heinkel while he was glaring at some documents in a room of the church. When he turned around, the one staring at him from the entrance to the room was a man of slender figure and gentle features, a clergyman of the Church of the Divine Dragon, and the one charged with acting as Philor's bodyguard, Tiga Rollian. Before her participation in the royal selection, it seemed like he had accompanied Philor as one of her attendants. Upon Heinkel's appointment as her knight, the two of them met for the first time, and since then have run into each other quite frequently. As one would expect, Tiga's initial impression towards Heinkel was the worst. No, that was not a matter limited to just Tiga. The same could be said for all the people in Philor's vicinity. In reality, the only person who welcomed Heinkel's appointment as her knight was Philor herself. Heinkel, well, that's only natural. Anybody would react like that, hell, even me. Looking at it objectively, Heinkel's current position was far beyond his measure. Even at her best, Philor was already reckless and caused unceasing worry to those around her. So placing someone like Heinkel, with all the baggage and infamy that came with him, so close to her, was an act that no person with any level of judgment could possibly accept. Regardless of Philor's own dragon's roar, it would have likely been more difficult to find anyone who had actually been convinced of this than those who had not. "Tiga, what's with the sudden distant look? Did you not hear my snide remark?" Heinkel, no, I heard it all right, and I sympathize with you all. Even though it's probably already hard enough being Miss Philor's attendant, being forced to take someone like me along too is, well, Tiga, if you can understand that, I would have liked you to have politely turned her down to begin with. Heinkel, can't argue with that. That would have been the proper answer for an adult, but cutting his words short there, Heinkel hesitated on whether to finish what he was about to say. But pressed by Tiga's gaze for the words that followed, he reluctantly opened his mouth. The reason he had not refused the hand Philor had offered him was as plain as day. Heinkel, well, it's something like an ignoble obsession, a far cry from any mature judgment. If adults were people who could accurately discern where to call things off and end them, knowing when to give up, then Heinkel was a horribly wretched creature who had failed to fully grow into an adult. But on the other hand, the adult whom Heinkel had admired more than anybody else in this world was a person who never let go of the sword until the very end of the end, cutting through even impossibility itself while never giving up on the things that he loved. That was something he had yearned for, something he would never be able to reach, something that not even the tips of his fingers would ever be able to touch upon. That might have been the genesis of Heinkel's curse, though even if he were to talk about this, Tiga likely would not be interested in the slightest. "Tiga, I've done some digging into your situation. Don't think ill of me. I don't want anyone dangerous being by Philor's side. Besides, part of it's already quite the well-known tale." However, at the tone imbued into Tiga's following words, Heinkel raised an eyebrow. He had lived a long time examining people's expressions, so he knew the delicate nature that existed in the subtleties of negative emotions filling the likes of contempt, ridicule, pity, and sympathy. That was precisely why it made him want to incline his head. After all, within Tiga's voice, there had unmistakably been a hint of concern for Heinkel. "Tiga, that thing you've been scowling at with a glum look for a while, is it Philor's itinerary? It's quite difficult to get that girl to stick to her schedule, isn't it?" Paying no mind to his suspicions, Tiga stole a glance at the documents from behind, before making an appropriately insightful comment about Philor. In fact, tomorrow's schedule, with activities such as making courtesy rounds as a royal candidate and fulfilling her duties as a saintess of the church, Philor's day-to-day had a dizzying busyness to it. Even with what was not written down on the itinerary, she would attend the divine service that coincided with sunrise in the morning, and after she finished her prayers, she would voluntarily lend an ear to the people who visit the church in search of counsel. Heinkel, and in the end, she's the type who'll absolutely never overlook any problem that presents itself to her. If she comes across a stray child by the roadside, or an elderly person facing difficulties carrying something, her plans for later will be doomed. Tiga. Ah, I know what you mean. One time in the past, Philor went missing, and it turned out that she had gone off to help an elderly person carry something, accompanying them 3 major streets away, before being treated to tea in their home and coming back. Heinkel. As long as her title is Saintess, it should be fine. Though actually, the moment she gained the title Saintess, doing stuff like that was plenty reckless. Now that she had become a royal candidate, she could no longer do as she had been until that point. When one gains an irreplaceable role, it comes with tasks that cannot be delegated. Such was expected of Philor too, and it went without saying which thing had a greater degree of importance. It went without saying, but Heinkel. It's not like Miss Philor wants to neglect her duties as a member of the church either. And on top of that, she also wants to devote herself to being a royal candidate. It's all way too excessive. Being made to accompany that enthusiasm, Heinkel had to keep busily running about all over the place. In place of Philor, who was always poking her head into everything, he was utterly swamped with work that did not befit a first knight in the slightest, pondering the best person to assign any given problem that emerges to, in order to best get it solved, rescheduling her delayed plans, making apologies to those who were scheduled to meet with her, and preparing in advance the documents and proposals that she would likely need next. In fact, ever since he had become Philor's knight, the opportunities for him to draw his sword had numbered 0. Tiga. Even so, while Philor attends service every morning, it seems like you never skip out on practice, huh? Though, I'd made the assumption that you surely wouldn't be a morning person. Heinkel, you think someone who's bad at waking up early would ever be fit as a knight? Tiga. I see, it's seeming more and more like I'd be ill-suited to it. I'm glad the grand duty of being a knight didn't end up falling to me. Either way, I probably wouldn't be able to deny my lack of strength. While adjusting the hat on his head, Tiga analyzed himself in a carefree manner, and Heinkel examined him through the corner of his eye. Heinkel. Lack of strength, huh? To be honest, Heinkel was unable to agree with Tiga's comment just now. To begin with, wearing a curved blade by his waist, Tiga was strong enough to be appointed as Philor's bodyguard, and even judging by Heinkel's eyes, his strength was nothing insignificant. His physique was flexible and well-tempered, and the way he carried himself showed that he also had ample real combat experience. Above all, he possessed an outstanding grit that would not be perturbed by anything. He was neither a swordsman nor a knight, however, he was a warrior. That was Heinkel's appraisal of him. Be that as it may, Heinkel, so how are your wounds? Tiga, I guess I can't say I've fully recovered yet. Still, they've gotten quite a bit better, but they were quite deep gashes to begin with. As expected, her alias of Valkyrie isn't just for show. Heinkel, the one who killed Sir McMahon and fled the scene, Duchess Karsten, Tiga gave his answer while patting the side of his torso through his clothes, causing Heinkel to furrow his brow. The name he had voiced belonged to none other than the very person responsible for inflicting the deep wound upon Tiga's flank, who was considered to have lit the fuse on the maelstrom of mayhem enveloping the royal capital at the moment. Crush Karsten, also known as the Valkyrie, who at first had been the front-runner to win the royal selection. And now, she was wanted for being the leading perpetrator behind the assassination of the central figure of the Council of Wise Men, Miklatov McMahon, her whereabouts under pursuit all throughout the kingdom. The incident itself had come as quite the shock, but what he found truly incomprehensible was the fact that Natsuki Subaru, who ought to have been Emilia's knight, had also been deemed a wanted fugitive for his complicity in Crush's actions. Furthermore, complicity was not the only charge he was facing. as he had even been placed under the exceedingly unbelievable suspicion of being none other than the Sin Archbishop of Sloth. Accompanying that, both Emilia, who was suspected of harboring rebellious intentions towards the royal castle, and Felt, who was unable to dispel the doubts regarding the falsification of her identity, had been taken into custody at the castle, and the members of both camps fled the royal capital. At that juncture, gargantuan witch beasts had been set loose in the town, and the Sword Saint had been mobilized to bring the situation under control. All of that had already transpired before Heinkel was brought to the royal capital, and even now, those events continued to spread a nightmarish chaos throughout not only the royal capital, but throughout the entire kingdom. Heinkel, by now, the stark atmosphere of the royal capital will be something that goes down in the kingdom's history. On the streets, the knights and the guards all have an imposing air about them, and the townsfolk have nothing cheerful to talk about, so spend all their time just keeping their heads down. Tiga. For the people who have a choice, leaving the royal capital is also possible, but those who don't are an overwhelming majority. To be honest, the church is also the busiest it's been in years. Heinkel. And that also strengthens the support for Miss Philor, huh? Tiga. I'm not fond of that way of thinking. Not just me, but Philor too. As Heinkel threw in a cynical remark, Tiga sharpened his gaze upon him. It seemed like that was not intended as a joke, and it was something that had seriously displeased him. So Heinkel raised both his hands to demonstrate his capitulation. But regardless of Tiga's feelings, in practice, that was how things were progressing. The more chaos spread in the kingdom, the more people's belief in the royal castle would be sprained, with their hearts instead beginning to take to the church that worshipped the divine dragon, which had continued to safeguard the kingdom with a proven track record. As a result, that had unmistakably become a tailwind for Philor, who had gotten a late start. And for Heinkel too, with his position as Philor's knight, it was certainly something that ought to inspire deep emotion within him, but Heinkel, honored father. Across Heinkel's mind, as he muttered, there flashed the existence of Wilhelm, his biological father whose whereabouts were currently unknown. Krush was wanted by the authorities for the crime of Miklatov's assassination, and Wilhelm, who had served her, was one of the relevant parties who had disappeared from the royal capital. It was conceivable that he had reconvened with his master and was assisting her on the run, but it went without saying that they were at an overwhelming disadvantage. Of course, if it was the famous sword demon, he might very well end up cutting through any adversity with that sword of his, though it was not as though such dreamlike expectations did not reside within Heinkel. Tiga, you also have it tough, don't you, Heinkel-san? As though he had sensed Heinkel's inner heart from his mutter and expression, Tiga shrugged. Having it tough, that comment was probably right. But if you were to bring that up, the entire Astria family had been fragmented ever since Heinkel had joined Priscilla's camp. Heinkel, my own difficulties aren't anything important. The only problem is that this might cause trouble for Miss Philor. My honored father and my son, they're both fully grown men. It's only natural that everyone wipes their own ass, right? Tiga. At the very least, your father was not present at the scene where I crossed blades with Duchess Karsten. It would be good if it turns out the suspicions against your father are unfounded. Tiga spoke those words and patted him on the back in encouragement, and after Heinkel hesitated on how to respond, he half-heartedly returned nothing but a crude awe. The comment about Wilhelm not having been present there, it was something he could have figured out even if it had not been expressly stated. If Wilhelm had been there, and Tiga had ended up crossing swords with him, Tiga would no longer exist in this world today. Besides, there was one other reason why his reply had been so vague, and that was something he would absolutely never reveal to Tiga. After all, it was because within Heinkel, a seedling of indelible distrust towards the Church of the Divine Dragon had begun to sprout. The scene changes. Within the current kingdom of Lugunica, the role fulfilled by the Church of the Divine Dragon was a major one. To begin with, the kingdom of Lugunica was under the protection of the divine dragon Volcanica, and with such stability and protection of the nation promised to them, they had continued to thrive until today. That alone was enough to naturally fill the majority of the kingdom's citizens with feelings of reverence towards the divine dragon. So inevitably, It also led to their unconditional faith in the Church of the Divine Dragon. Heinkel was no exception to that, and that was precisely why when his wife fell into a slumber from which she never awoke, he began making frequent visits to the church, placing his belief in the house of prayer and miracle. Regrettably, Heinkel's prayers had borne no fruit, and he had gone on to commit a momentous transgression, such that he could no longer bring himself to face the divine dragon or its followers. Since then, he had grown distant from the church, hence why he could not help but scoff at how ill-suited his current position was. But once he finished deploring that foolishness of his, Heinkel had no choice but to confront it directly. The distrust towards the Church of the Divine Dragon burgeoning within himself, regarding the existence of Philor. To be precise, regarding the Church's intentions in having Philor participate in the royal selection. Appointed as her knight, what had become painfully clear to him from observing Philor at such a close proximity was that she possessed an innate goodness with no ulterior motives whatsoever, to the point it was somewhat frightening. In absolutely everything, no matter who stood before her, Philor would always give her all, and ignoring her concerning sense of judgment when it came to naming Heinkel as her knight. Whenever she was pressed for a decision, rather than panicking, she made her choice on her own responsibility, possessing the ability to take action in order to bring those decisions to fruition. That was why she was always talking, always laughing, always crying, and always on the move. The talent of individual virtue capable of mobilizing one's surroundings just by speaking one's desires, that was unmistakably the blood pedigree of the Lugunican royal family. Philor herself did not have an answer as to whether she was truly the royal princess who had gone missing 15 years prior or not, and she claimed that she did not desire one, but Heinkel. There's no way that there are two princesses. Since Heinkel had been intimately familiar with Prince Ford Lugunica, with the father of the missing princess, and the younger brother to the late King Randohol Lugunica, he had no doubts about that. Ford did not have twins or triplets. His daughter was unmistakably one person. And on the precipice of that night 15 years ago, that singular individual had vanished from the royal castle. The missing royal princess, it was impossible that she could be anyone other than Felt or Philor, who had both risen to the stage as royal candidates. Henceforth, someone was plotting. Philor and Felt, in order to prop up either of the two girls as a survivor of the royal family, and use them for some ulterior purpose. When he thought about it like that, and considered the circumstances leading to Philor's participation in the royal selection, he had no choice but to bear a strong distrust towards the Church of the Divine Dragon. However, Heinkel, just what the hell do I even want to do? Pondering the matter to this extent, Heinkel's thoughts came to a standstill as if in fear. It was as if he was surrounded by a heavy fog with poor visibility as the sunset was drawing ever close, and yet still chose to do absolutely nothing about it. An exceedingly foolish act. However, within that dense fog, there existed a light that Heinkel had never stopped yearning for over many long years. If he were to take a step in the wrong direction, he might lose that light to eternity. For that reason, he could not move. He could not bring himself to move, in fear of making a definitive, fatal mistake. The scene changes. Ultimately, he remained unable to find an answer, with time being the only thing to flow. After Heinkel and Philor had entered into a relationship of master and servant, time simply continued to pass, first a few days, which then turned to weeks, and before long a month had passed. During that time, the Philor camp re-established the flow of resources which had stagnated due to the royal capital's turmoil, responding to the requests raised by the chapels and treatment centers in many locations, steadily increasing support for her as a royal candidate. As for Heinkel, his distrust towards the church had still yet to be dispelled. However, since it was not as if he could do anything that hindered Philor, he ended up spending day after day constantly running away from his looming apprehensions, merely focusing all of his attention on dealing with the problems before him. However, while her activities in the royal selection were underway, the two matters that Philor herself hoped to resolve above all else had not made even the slightest bit of progress. Heinkel, another one came back, huh? In one of the rooms of the church, looking down at the mountain of documents piled up atop the desk, and ascertaining the presence of a sealed letter which he had grown so used to seeing, Heinkel frowned in exasperation. On the opposite side of that desk littered with papers, the woman who was stifling her yawn while working, Sakura Element, contrary to her seemingly unmotivated attitude, briskly sorted the documents by sender and arranged them such that the letters could be easily processed and reviewed. With her sleepy eyes and her languid demeanor, she glanced at Heinkel, Sakura. Yes, it would appear so. As per usual, it's helpful that their replies are so quick, but as for the contents, it looks like they deferred us once again. Heinkel. Deferred, huh? How many times is that now? Sakura. The letters we've sent to the royal castle, both long and short, total 47. The ones we've sent to the church total 32. Plus, there are also things like additional materials or appended affidavits, and since Phylor-chan is such a proactive correspondent, it would seem that we've long since surpassed 100 letters. While sorting letters with a single hand, Sakura skillfully checked her record book on the edge of the desk with her other hand. Fed up by her answer, Heinkel heaved a sigh. With the persistence to surpass 100, Phylor had been sending unsolicited letters to the royal castle and the church almost every day. The contents were, decidedly, requests for meetings with Emilia and Felt, who were both in custody at the castle, and for them to be granted another hearing. Her other request was for permission to use the sacrament in Phylor's possession to perform treatment on the victims of the witch cult remaining in the Watergate city of Prestella. Phylor was tenaciously fighting on both fronts, attempting to go through all the official procedures necessary, however. Heinkel, even with all this, why won't those guys just nod their heads yes? Setting aside the meetings with Emilia Sama and Miss Felt, there ought to be value in trying to help with Prestella. Or maybe, is there some sort of mistake with our paperwork? Sakura, my Mai, do you suspect I made an oversight? In that case, I must be a terrible nuisance, making Phylor-chan waste her efforts on 100 letters. Heinkel, I was just pondering aloud. I don't doubt you. If you were that incompetent, there's no way you could have gotten a title as important as personal secretary to a saintess. Sakura is that Suo. Though I think it's also completely possible for it to be something like riding a parent's coattails, Don't you think so? Deputy Commander of the Royal Guard Heinkel-chan. Heinkel. Don't attach Chan to old men, Sakura-chan. Sakura. I'll defer your request for Noa, Heinkel-chan. Giving a reply with no intention to grant his request, Sakura handed the letter that had been sent by the royal castle over to Heinkel. Even if he closed his eyes, the contents on its unfolded page were exactly what he had expected would be written there. At present, the Council of Wise Men were in the midst of carefully deliberating over the requests, so they wished for them to wait for the time being until a conclusion was reached. Pertaining to both the treatment of the two being held in custody and to the use of the sacrament for Prestella, the wording had merely been shifted slightly, and the ultimate answer remained unchanged. Heinkel, they won't reject us, but they won't approve us either. Just how long do they plan on keeping this up? Sakura, who's to say? That's something for the high and mighty up in the royal castle to decide, after all. The situation is what it is, so isn't everyone just being extra careful? Heinkel, they've gone way past the definition of careful at this point. Miss Phylor is also at her limit, and lately she's been constantly insisting that her heart is being scraped away. Sakura, that sure sounds like how Phylor-chan would phrase it. Sakura placed her hand over her mouth and giggled, but unfortunately, Heinkel felt no inclination to laugh in agreement with her. Rather, when he saw Phylor's increasingly forced liveliness day after day, when it was so obviously painful for her, made him feel depressed in turn. Heinkel, if the castle's no good, how about the church? Miss Phylor is a saintess, isn't she? Can't she decide for herself who she uses her own sacrament on? Sakura, she can't decide. It isn't something so cheap, after all. Asserted so definitively, Heinkel was slightly taken aback. One by one, Sakura tapped her finger on documents split into 3 piles on top of the desk, and began, listening. Sakura, to begin with, saintess isn't an official rank within the church, It is a special title bestowed upon adherents who have received the divine dragon's favor particularly strongly. Everyone expresses gratitude to them, and they are seated in front of even the high and mighty at ceremonies. Buat. It's not like they have a seat or any powerful influence at the Holy Synod, where the big shots of the church gather. That's just how it is. Heinkel. And despite that, they're treated publicly as the face of the church. Sakura. Being a symbol that visibly supports the faith of the people is also an important job of a saintess, after all. That said, even if you were to try to assign Philor-chan just the duty of acting as an obedient symbol, it would probably be more difficult than teaching the dragon's tail to sit still. He could not help but agree to that, but the explanation that preceded the conclusion did not sit right with him. After all, in the current situation, when Philor was not responsible for her duties as a royal candidate, she was acting a symbol of the Church of the Divine Dragon in the form of a saintess. It was a nasty way of putting it, but he could not see it as anything but an implicit expectation that she must carry out her role as mere decoration to the fullest. Sakura, surprisingly, I believe Philor-chan would be rather suited to being the monarch, you know. That attitude of yours, Heinkel-chan, is also the result of having been enchanted by Philor-chan's caliber as a ruler. Sakura, who smiled as she looked through his inner heart in his silence, was a poor matchup for Heinkel. That competence, which did not match her appearance and demeanor, could be sensed in all aspects of her conduct. He found Tiga to be the cream of the crop as a bodyguard of the church, but in Sakura's case, far from simply being the cream of the crop as a civil officer dispatched by the church, it seemed as if she was truly among just a handful of exceptionally competent individuals. In reality, while it was Philor's correspondent pen that had written enough letters to reach a count of 100, the one to prepare the documents and everything necessary for that, taking all the proper procedures, had been entirely Sakura. And as a relevant party within the Church of the Divine Dragon, she had her hands reached out to nearly all of its divisions. Heinkel, as long as they have you, it seems like the church would generally be able to function well. Sakura. Why, you're giving me too much credit. Unlike Philor-chan, I'm really unable to put on the kind of face that would give hope to the many. Besides, an organization that would entirely falter on the mistake of a single person would be far too dangerous and wouldn't be able to cooperate. Heinkel, I see, that's pretty modest of you. Sakura's answer, given with a wave of her hand, appeared to be a provocation of sorts against the monarchy. In order to compensate for such an absence, the kingdom of Lugunica had the Council of Wise Men, but in the current situation, where even the actions of that council seemed to have dulled, he had no words to give in response, even as a scrap of a knight of the kingdom. Heinkel, though it's being said that with the death of Sir McMahon, they've been in turmoil. It was not as though he had witnessed the Council of Wise Men deliberating up close, but Miklatov had certainly been their central figure, who always served as the mediator. But it was not as though the other capable individuals in the council had no influence or say, and starting with Sir Bordeaux Zurjev, who would always burst out into overtly heated debates, there ought to have been a flourishing exchange of opinions and viewpoints. As a matter of fact, the problems concerning the royal capital and royal castle did not number just one or two, and even in the absence of Miklatov, they remained capable of swiftly dealing with those just as they had before. In other words, the only matters being kept in a state of uncertainty were the two cases that Philor was proactively trying to take part in. As for what that meant, Heinkel too was none the wiser. Heinkel is the reason why the church doesn't approve Miss Philor's use of the sacrament, because it's involved with the matter of Duchess Karsten being wanted. Sakura, I guess I can't deny it. As a matter of fact, it's considered a problem that Philor-chan used the sacrament without going through the Holy Synod first, so it seems like they're debating revoking recognition of her as a saintess, after all. Heinkel, they can revoke her being a saintess. Sakura, as per the rules, I don't think it's ever been put into practice, though. She made it out safe this time, but if it's already been raised for discussion once, she mustn't get too comfortable, you know. Sakura spoke without a care, but once again, Heinkel could not help but be shocked. Philor's independent decision, which had sent great tremors through the royal castle, seemed to not only be a considerable deal for the Church of the Divine Dragon too, but was also something that placed even Philor's own position in jeopardy. Thus, after having gone so far as to treat Crush with the sacrament, For her to then become a wanted fugitive for perpetrating the assassination of Miklatov, the situation was naught but a headwind for Philor. Heinkel, when something you try to do ends up backfiring, I know that feeling all too well. Sakura, aren't you getting rather eager? Oh yeah, but that's only natural, isn't it? Philor-chan's license to use the sacrament is a matter of life or death for you too, right, Heinkel-chan? Heinkel, Sakura, or perhaps, is it a result of you getting used to being Philor-chan's knight? At the gaze and voice that seemed to be mocking him, Heinkel loudly snorted. Unfortunately for Sakura, Heinkel had no obligation to answer her sadistic sarcasm. Of course, it was the truth that he wished to verify as soon as possible if the power of Philor's sacrament would be capable of saving his wife, Luana. But, Heinkel, when it comes to the people waiting in Prestella, it's not ambiguous as to whether it'll be effective or not. Rather, it's a matter of good results being expected. If the lack of permission is the only thing determining whether they'll be saved or not, it's only natural to want it to be approved immediately. Sakura, you're prioritizing others over yourself. Heinkel-chan, were you always such a good person? Heinkel, that's not what I said. Even though waiting for something can be a salvation, being kept waiting isn't anything of the sort. Sakura, I suppose so. In their tit-for-tat, Heinkel voiced his true feelings as if spitting them out. However, as Sakura responded to him, the tone of ridicule had vanished from her voice. He found that dubious, but even when examining her expression and eyes, Heinkel was unable to perceive any such changes that had made him feel that way, so it seemed he was merely overthinking things. Either way, Sakura, shouldn't we just fulfill our duties in silence? If we do that, I'm sure there will be at least one good thing that comes our way. For someone who was a member of the Church of the Divine Dragon, it felt to Heinkel far too modest a murmur, yet at the same time, one that was terribly sincere. The scene changes. Philor, I've decided. If even writing 100 letters isn't going to cut it, I'm going to personally deliver the 101st letter. If I make sure to look them in the eye as I make my request, it'll surely be difficult for them to refuse. And, at the words of Philor, spoken with a face as if she had received some divine revelation from the dragon, her knight, bodyguard, and secretary were each forced to accompany her to the royal castle. Working herself up and believing this time would surely be the one, Philor's attitude was something to be esteemed, but, Philor, I just don't get it. The moment she stepped out of the reception and into the chalky white corridor, Philor raised her voice as if to say her patience had reached its limit. Hearing her indignant voice echo throughout the hall of Royal Castle, the civil officers and employees passing by looked at her in surprise. And cognizant of them all, Tiga placed his index finger to his lips. Tiga, Philor, you'll stand out too much if you start shouting in a place like this. If your words just now reached the ears of the higher-ups, you won't be turned away at the reception next time, but at the very entrance hall. Philor, I mean, how can they treat us like this? Even though we told them we'd prepare everything necessary if they could just tell us what was insufficient, it's always, this is still under consideration. That is on hold, or that remains up in the air for everything. Just what in the world are we supposed to do? Sakura, I guess there isn't anything that particularly needs to be added or fixed. Philor, in that case, they ought to just let us through. Heinkel, from the beginning, they never had any intention of listening. Angrily voicing her complaints, Philor turned around at Heinkel's words. Tears were welling up in her ruby eyes, but Heinkel did not have a handkerchief on hand to wipe them. In place of that handkerchief, he gave her the answer she desired without carefully choosing his words. Heinkel, the reason we're being stopped is neither a deficiency in our documents, nor a failure to meet some conditions. Miss Philor, the thing they want is for you to give up, and to stop bringing this discussion up to them. Philor, that sort of thing is strange. Who would even think something like that? Heinkel, yeah, that's what I think is the problem too. Philor appeared as if she was throwing a tantrum, but given that she had already done everything she possibly could have before throwing a tantrum, there was naught else she was allowed to do beyond throwing a tantrum. As a matter of fact, the question that Philor currently harbored was something that Heinkel had also been unable to find an answer for, and the inexplicability of it all had only continued to increase over this month and a half. Heinkel, you'd think that the stage was being set way too conveniently. In all honesty, excluding the fact that Philor's entrance was delayed in the royal selection, everything else felt like it had been thoroughly set up by the Church of the Divine Dragon. However, upon opening the lid on that, while it was certainly Philor's own actions and virtue that had been steadily increasing support for her within the tumultuous royal capital, when it came to the visit to the Watergate city that would definitively solidify her support base, it was none other than the higher echelon at the church, the Holy Synod, that would not grant her permission. If they truly wanted to make Philor the monarch, then it was a measure they undoubtedly ought to take. Despite that, rather than supporting this path, the Church of the Divine Dragon maintained a position that seemed to obstruct it, and the movements of the Council of Wise Men did not side with Philor either. Having come to this, the distrust Heinkel harbored toward the church had begun to intensify in a form that differed to what it had been initially. Merely, even if his distrust toward the church intensified in new ways, there were also aspects that remained unchanged. It was the fact that Philor was an immature child who needed an adult to take her side. Tiga, Philor, I understand your feelings, but let's return for now. Urged on by Tiga's gentle voice, Philor withdrew in frustration and began walking. The staff of the royal castle, who passed them on the way to the entrance, all halted their steps upon seeing Philor and performed courteous bows. As a royal candidate, and as a saintess, there was no falsehood in the sentiments of reverence directed her way. Even so, it was an irony that not a single one of her requests was approved. Then, carrying forward an oppressive silence as they turned the corner of the corridor, Heinkel. Grasping the figure of the person walking in their direction, Heinkel reflexively swallowed his breath. Heinkel, Reinhard. Before he could even think, the breath he had swallowed spilled out with the sound of that name. Clad in the white uniform of the knights, the red-haired youth with the dragon's sword at his waist, Reinhard van Astrea trained his gaze straight upon the one who had called out his name. Naturally, their mutual blue eyes, representative of their blood relation, crossed gazes. Reinhard, it has been quite some time, father. Heinkel, yeah. Even he cursed how pathetic of a reply that had been. He had been caught completely off guard. Preoccupied with the things on his mind, the unforeseen nature of the encounter rendered him unable to immediately whip out the nasty remarks and verbal abuse he otherwise ought to have had prepared. Ultimately, unable to settle on any words other than that moronic answer, a silence fell between the father and son. Reinhard. To Reinhard's rear, he was being accompanied by two individuals clad in the white uniforms of the guard. At a glance, one might say they were subordinates accompanying the sword saint for his duties. But rather than on their surroundings, the gazes of the two were unceasingly concentrated on Reinhard's every action. Above all, Heinkel had no recognition of the faces of those knights. At the very least, they were knights of unclear origin, whom Heinkel did not know. For what reason were these knights accompanying Reinhard? Philor. Reinhard, perfect timing, I had wanted to talk to you. Trampling straight onto the murky atmosphere between father and son, Philor rushed over to Reinhard. The knights behind him poised themselves in response, but Reinhard reined them in by raising a single hand. Reinhard, Philor Sama, looks like you are paying a visit to the royal castle today. Philor, yes. I came to talk about Emilia, Felt, and the matter with Pristella. But more importantly than what I have to say right now, I want to hear from you. Reinhard, from me, is it? Philor, yes, that's right. How's Felt? You must be meeting her every now and then, right? Reinhard. As she closed the distance on him without any restraint, Reinhard silently held his breath. Eventually, Reinhard gave a slow shake of his head, pronouncing no. Philor, do you mean you've yet to see her today? Reinhard, that is not the case. Rather, I have not seen Felt Sama since she was brought into the royal castle. Philor, since Felt was brought to the castle, not even once, even though it's already been over a month. Philor's voice jumped, and both of the knights to the rear stiffened their shoulders in unison. However, Reinhard simply nodded in silence at Philor's response. But it was only natural for Philor to be shocked. This was a completely different dimension compared to Philor not being given approval to meet Emilia and Felt. Philor, you're Felt's knight, aren't you? For you to not be able to see Felt, that's really strange. Don't you think so? Reinhard. Visitation is forbidden, so it cannot be helped. Philor, but you want to see her, don't you? You surely want to speak with her. Reinhard. I am the sword of the kingdom. Given that I have orders from the royal castle, I have a duty to comply with them. Philor. But you aren't just the sword of the kingdom, you're Felt's sword too. That was, Reinhard. I am the sword of the kingdom, Philor Sama. After doing one lap around, the conversation returned to the initial response. It was not as though Philor's words had been insufficient. Neither was it that Reinhard did not understand what she was trying to say. No matter what he was told, no matter what he felt, Reinhard would never change that answer. It could not be changed, was perhaps a more accurate way of putting it. Philor, do you really believe that Felt deceived the kingdom? Reinhard, no. That too had been an instant response, one bereft of any hesitation. Eyes flickering before Philor could ask, so then, why? In response, Reinhard went on. Reinhard, my belief in Felt Sama and my ability to prove her innocence are different matters. If I were to renege on my orders, it would only deepen the doubt cast upon Felt Sama, worsening her position even further. Philor, so you're only able to do what you're told. Reinhard. At that question, Reinhard chose neither affirmation nor denial. However, the very fact that he chose neither of the two options demonstrated precisely where he stood. Heinkel turned his gaze to the two knights standing behind Reinhard. It was obvious that they were not Reinhard's allies. In that case, their job was probably to keep an eye on Reinhard, but what a meaningless precaution. If Reinhard felt so inclined, the likes of them would be defeated within an instant. Then before anyone could even notice, he would vanish from sight and arrive at Felt's side with nobody in the royal castle capable of stopping him. But Reinhard would not do that. He could not. So long as he remained the sword saint, that was. Philor, in that case at least tell this to Felt. In Reinhard's lapse of silence, Philor clenched her fist tight and declared, Philor, I believe in Felt. I believe in Emilia too. Outside of the royal castle, there are people who don't believe the two of them would ever do something like betraying the kingdom. Please tell her that. Reinhard. Thank you very much. Philor, it's fine if it's a letter too. I'll even write it myself. Reinhard, however, I cannot promise it. I am also forbidden from delivering words or items to Felt Sama. Philor, that's... Reinhard, forgive me. I must attend to my next duty. Hearkening that utterly heartbreaking reply, Philor's shapely face twisted out of shape. However, without folding to Philor's reaction, Reinhard left her with a bow and began moving past them. Just before his shoulder passed by Heinkel's, his legs suddenly halted. Reinhard, father, I heard that you have become Philor Sama's knight. Heinkel, yeah, seems like it. If you got any complaints, Reinhard, congratulations. Lauded so before he could prattle off any foul language, Heinkel's words got stuck in his throat. At a distance where their shoulders were almost touching, Reinhard's gaze was trained squarely on Heinkel as they faced each other. With the face of his son before his eyes, the son who, before he could realize, had caught up to him in height, Heinkel averted his eyes, unable to bear it. Heinkel, whether it's to be celebrated or not, you couldn't know. Reinhard, even so, I am glad that you were chosen, father. Heinkel. Hearing those words, Heinkel could not say anything back. It was not a snide remark, nor irony. From the bottom of his heart, Reinhard was celebrating the fact that someone had chosen his father, who had fallen so low, to be their knight. Did he not remember what sort of horrible vilification Heinkel had hurled at him in Prestella? Had he forgotten that in the same city, Heinkel had turned a blade against his very lady? Or perhaps were even those such trivial matters that they left no scar upon Reinhard's heart? Performing a small bow, Reinhard proceeded down the white corridor, the two knights accompanying him. Philor continued to watch over his back in frustration. But Heinkel, unlike Philor, could not even bring himself to glare at the back of his son, fading into the distance. The scene changes. Tiga, Philor, your remarks towards Reinhard were quite careless. Upon returning to the cathedral of the Church of the Divine Dragon, Tiga closed the door to the reception room and turned back to face Philor with a stern face. On the way back from the royal castle, silence had reigned over the interior of the dragon carriage, but internally, he must have been contemplating how he ought to scold her. Tiga. You might have had the intention of choosing your words carefully, but there were knights and other servants of the castle back there. If word of it reaches the Council of Wise Men, Philor, even you will be considered defiant to the royal castle. Philor, it's best to let them think that. I'm seriously feeling defiant after all. Tiga, don't say those sort of things. I'm telling you that if you also get banned from meetings and visits to the castle, you'll truly lose your ability to do anything. Philor, I know. Tiga, if you know, then you shouldn't be doing such. Philor, I get it. Philor vehemently cut off Tiga's words. The menacing air she radiated caused Tiga's breath to catch, and Sakura also cast her eyes down. Seeing their reactions, Philor let out a hoarse, "I'm sorry." Philor, I know, I'm sorry. But it's because I know that it makes me so excessively angry. If I don't follow what the people up in the royal castle decide, they'll stop treating me as a royal candidate. And if they stop treating me as a royal candidate, I won't be able to save Emilia and Felt. That's why I have no choice but to just sit here and wait as I'm told. Tiga, Philor, I'm sorry. I'm well aware that the two of you are only saying all this for my sake. Tiga, Philor, let me speak alone with Heinkel-sama for a bit. Hearing her request, Tiga returned a hesitant nod. Sakura exited the room first, and Tiga followed after. The door was shut, thus leaving Philor and Heinkel as the only two in the room. Heinkel. Atop the desk, a month's worth of return letters from the royal castle were lined up. Philor turned her eyes to each and every letter and eventually breathed a silent exhale. Philor, Heinkel-sama. Heinkel. What is it? Even if it was Philor, things were likely taking a considerable toll on her. Her desperate plea remained undelivered, and it could neither be said that her voice had successfully reached Reinhard. Even if she was a girl who proactively attempted any problem that came her way, it was only natural to grow exhausted after such a lack of results. After his unforeseen encounter with Reinhard, and the word of congratulations he could have never anticipated, Heinkel was also facing extreme mental exhaustion. Still, with as much mettle as he could muster, he readied himself to try and receive Philor's words. Then, leaning her back against the closed door, Philor informed Heinkel of a matter she wished to keep hidden from the ears of the departed Tiga and Sakura. That was, Philor, how could we pull off a successful breakout from the castle?